Good morning, Warsaw. Today is Wednesday, 27th September. It will be cloudy with highs of 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit for our American listeners. Sunrise will be at 6:46 a.m. and sunset at 6:39 p.m. We are on the 58th day of the Warsaw Uprising, and the Home Army up in the Campinos forest are having heavy battles against the Germans. But what else is happening?
Well, it's the day that the Mokotów region of Warsaw capitulates, leading, unfortunately, to the murder of a number of insurgents. So it was 4:00 this morning that the company commanders were pulled together for a briefing meeting to discuss the situation and what their options were. They had to take into account various factors: the condition of the troops, the supplies that they had, both of ammunition and weapons, but also of their own foods, medicines, and so on. They knew that prolonging the fight in the area would largely just result in the death of their own wounded and of new deaths in the burning buildings, collapsing buildings of the Germans set fire to them as they came through. And they decided it was basically impossible to break through now. So they sent in a few negotiators to the German lines to arrange the evacuation of civilians and the wounded and establish the conditions for a military capitulation of that part of the city. Took some hours, and then while they were still waiting for those negotiators to return, hopefully with terms, the Germans attacked from the areas they held. So that's the south and the west of Mokotów. Some of the Home Army units retreated further away. The Germans told the negotiators that at this point, they would all just be treated as prisoners of war, and they sent them in with the opportunity. They gave them just 15 minutes to negotiate or to organise the ceasefire, to stop the firing. At some point during this, we know that one of Zoe's friends, Dr. Sofia Franio, her flatmate, probably her girlfriend, her sweetheart, certainly the person most closest to her in life, was killed in the destruction of a building in Mokotów right in these last few days of the uprising. Franio knew where she died. She was unable to get her body out at that point, but did later go back. And in the days after the uprising, there's reports of her crouching in the earth and digging her out with her bare hands from the rubble. So it's just one of those, right at the end of the war. It's like the death of the poets at the end of the First World War. It's this unnecessary extension of the horror of it all. Anyhow, the Home Army units were ordered to lay down their weapons in that area, and the fighting ceased around, between 10 and 11 that morning. So the captured insurgents were sent to be concentrated at a school in Rajana, and from there they were marched to Fort Mokotów and then taken to the transit camp in Pruszków, which we've talked about before. There were around 1,700 insurgents and over 2,000 injured people were sent out to Pruszków. But that wasn't the end of it. So after the capitulation, the Germans shot 119 insurgents and several civilians who emerged from the sewers in the area. Some other civilians and insurgents did manage to evacuate through the sewers to South Śródmieszka. About 800 emerged safely from a sewer close to Wojciechowski Park and a few other sewers as well. It's interesting to know, if you go to Warsaw today, there aren't a lot of information boards on the sewers itself, but if you look at some of the main interjunctions, you can see some of the cobbles are laid in a different direction to others, and they form lines. It looks a bit like repair works have been undertaken, but actually they denote the path of some of these sewers that the people managed to escape from the worst areas of the city. So you can see the routes today that they undertook beneath the city itself. But the key part of this is that Mokotów is one of the key areas of the city, and that has now capitulated. And the Home Army are being, diminished. Their fighters are going into captivity. The civilians are getting out. They're being sent through Pruszków deeper into Germany to do work for the German war effort, even at this stage. And some of those that are late are just being shot in the streets.
Well, that brings me to the murder of those 119 insurgents, really. And we've spoken about this before. We've spoken about the size of these sewers, the length of these sewers, the conditions of these sewers. I also want you to all to imagine having to do this yourselves. Now, these people ended up coming out through a manhole straight into an area that was occupied by the enemy. And the question is, how did they actually manage to do that? Well, it's chaotic down there, first of all. We know that the Germans would drop petrol, they would drop fire, they would drop grenades. It was dark. There would be wounded, injured, sick people with you. You had barely any room to move. It was absolutely chaotic. And what happened was, some of these people, when they were heading to Śródmieście, they got caught up in this chaos because General Monter basically gave them an order just to head back to Mokotów. Just as they were evacuating, they came across all of these various barriers. They struggled to get through floating corpses. And like I said, falling grenades, the smell, and just the absolute horror that they were going through it. One insurgent managed to get himself caught within barbed wire, which then followed all the others who were behind him. They were exhausted. They were stuck in this sewer for nearly 20 hours. Now, if I were you, I don't know how I would have felt after 20 hours being stuck in such conditions, but I wouldn't want to be getting lost, and I would want to just get out in those conditions. And that's exactly what they did. Found the first manhole, they left. And unfortunately, they landed straight into the hands of the Germans. The Germans checked, removed their documents. They had with them as well about 50 soldiers from the Guard Company of a completely different regiment. The one thing we do need to remember about this was that there was a ceasefire in effect, and that these insurgents were supposed to be treated as prisoners of war. However, they were not. They were pulled out, documents checked, and shot on the spot.
Actually, there is a brilliant film that I'm sure many of our listeners will know by Andrzej Wajda called Kanal. It's a black and white film made in the 60s, and it is so evocative of the struggle, the conditions that they were facing, the struggle of these people, the heroism, and also the fear, the terror, and the consequences. So, very much recommended that people take a look at Kanal.
It's one of those aspects. The sewers, as part of the narrative of the Rising, is really, really significant. And it's like you just described, Alina. It's something it's kind of impossible for us to imagine how utterly gruesome it must have been under there. And then to sort of exit of that and face execution, it's just unimaginable. And you were describing before, Claire, about how, sometimes you can see, patterns in the cobblestones or so on where repairs have been made or whatever. But, it brought to mind for me the Warsaw Uprising Memorial, which is on Krasiński Square, I think it is, which has, these sort of larger than life-size figures, lifting themselves out of the manhole. So it's a really integral part of, the imagery and the whole narrative of the Rising is the role played by the sewers.
Also, what's really interesting is that when I post about this, because those who don't follow me on social media won't know, but I post the faces like Claire does, tell the personal stories. I love to do that too, and give a face, give an image of what these people look like who died and perished in the Warsaw Uprising. And when I talk about this specific event, the amount of times I've had to write, and it's a continuous thing, they entered the sewer and they never came out.
Yeah, so we're talking about the fall of Mokotów, the surrender of Mokotów on the 27th of September. And there's, just to sort of finish up on that, there's an interesting entry from Diary of Erich von den Bach, SS commander of Warsaw. And he says, "I'm sitting here with a beating heart and waiting for the victory at Mokotów. Tonight, the Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler telephoned me. He was very pleased. I told him that Mokotów must fall today. This morning, a Polish major came to my house with a translator proposing the capitulation of Mokotów. Currently, some of the insurgents are already being disarmed, and I am currently waiting for a telephone message from my representatives, whom I sent to the Poles in Mokotów. Hurrah, he says, there's a phone call now. The capitulation of Mokotów has been signed."
Thank you so much for joining us for Day 58. Please join us tomorrow for Day 59. And remember, if you like us, please go rate us on your favourite listening platform. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.